The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
A big duffel bag was found abandoned on the lonely section of Highway 12 in rural Greene County on October 17, 2015. An old man contacted 911 because he thought the bag was strange. They tried, but were unable, to move the extremely heavy bag as the responding officer arrived. After deciding to look into it more, they opened the bag and discovered something that would follow them around for the rest of their lives. The Smith-Jones family, a blended family with an apparently ideal facade, was at the heart of this catastrophe. On November 12, 1982, John Smith Oliver, a prosperous businessman in his late 40s, was born in Jacksonville, Florida. John was brought up with strong morals and a strong work ethic because he came from a middle-class family. He was instilled with a sense of duty and ambition by his parents, who were both high school sweethearts, a quality that would help him in his future undertakings was the calm resolve that characterized John's early years. John became known as a rising star in his chosen area as he grew older because of his charisma and innate leadership skills. 6 years ago, he wed Avery Jones, a lovely and endearing woman in her mid-30s. They and their offspring from past marriages had become a close-knit family. John Smith and Natasha Smith, his former spouse. Their tale started in 1990, more than 20 years ago, when they were both young and driven individuals pursuing their goals in the vibrant city of New York. John, a rising star in the banking industry, was presenting on investment ideas at a networking event when they first met. A clever marketing professional named Natasha was in the audience and was struck by John's charm and confidence right away. When they started talking after the presentation, John was captivated by Natasha's beauty, intelligence, and inventiveness. After exchanging phone numbers, they met for dinner at a hip Manhattan restaurant for their first date. There was no denying their chemistry, and they soon found that they had similar interests in business, art, and travel. They encouraged one another's goals and careers as their relationship grew. John's financial business flourished because to Natasha's marketing skills, which helped him attract well-known customers. In the meantime, Natasha's marketing company was thriving, and she was able to grow it thanks to John's financial advice. Together, they created a commercial empire, with Natasha's marketing firm taking home multiple accolades and John's company emerging as a major force in the banking sector. Peers looked up to them and revered them. They were New York City's golden pair. Their private lives were just as prosperous. In front of friends, family, and business acquaintances, they were married in a grand ceremony at a posh Hamptons house. Their entire world revolved around their gorgeous baby, Parker, but over time, their seemingly ideal relationship started to show signs of weakness. Their marriage suffered as a result of John's long hours and frequent travel, and Natasha began to feel more and more abandoned. She gave her everything to her career, yet they became more and more separated. The gap between them widened in spite of their attempts to patch things up. Their interactions became difficult, and they started to dispute more often. Their friends and relatives noticed the difference and could see the tension between them. They got into a heated dispute in front of their friends and co-workers at a charity banquet one fateful evening. Natasha stormed out of the event after the argument, leaving John ashamed and alone. John's discovery that Natasha was having an affair with a younger man, a gifted artist she had met at a gallery opening, was the last straw. John was saddened by the revelation and came to the conclusion that their marriage could not be saved. They fought bitterly over Parker's custody during their ugly and well-publicized divorce. They ultimately agreed to share custody, but the harm had already been done. Antagonism and heartache had marked the end of their once adoring romance. The parts were left for John to pick up. His career and personal life are in ruins. He immersed himself in his work, using it as a way to escape the hurt of his broken marriage. However, the scars from his divorce remained with him for years after it was over. Natasha's health severely deteriorated shortly after their 2006 divorce. She had been concealing a terrible secret. She was found to have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, which had rapidly spread throughout her body. She fought valiantly, but on the second day of March 2007, a year after their divorce, she passed away from the illness. Despite their turbulent ending, her death shocked and devastated John. Her passing evoked a range of feelings he believed he had long suppressed, yet he had never stopped loving her. He witnessed the effects of her death on his son Parker, who was having a hard time dealing with his mother's death when he went to her funeral. John met Avery Jones, a sweet and lovely person who was a friend of a friend, in 2008 while he was working through his grief. Her husband had died in a terrible accident only a few years earlier, leaving her a widow herself. John found himself pulled to her warmth and compassion as they bonded over their common experiences of heartbreak and loss. John was first hesitant to be married again, but he ended himself falling in love with Emily. He was thankful that she was in his life because she restored happiness and light. In 2009, they were joined by close friends and family in a private ceremony. Parker, John's 22-year-old son, had always been close to his father and was a lively and gregarious young man. Avery, Emily's 25-year-old daughter, was a beautiful and lively young lady who had immediately taken center stage in the family. The Smith-Jones family seemed to be a caring and encouraging group to strangers. When Avery's lifeless body was found packed inside a huge duffel bag and dumped along the lonely stretch of Highway 12 in rural Greene County on October 18, 2015, everything changed for the Smith-Jones family. The family's flawless facade started to fall apart after the horrifying discovery rocked the little town. When authorities examined the crime scene, they discovered that Avery had suffered considerable pain and struggle, as evidenced by the terrible mutilation of her corpse. Once nimble and full of life and promise, the young woman had met a terrible end. The family was devastated and perplexed by the news of Avery's murder. 2 days earlier, Avery said she was leaving the house to spend time with her boyfriend Adrian and would return the following week. Detective Matthews was immediately placed in charge of the case after the horrific discovery of Avery's body. The Smiths were questioned by the police in their house on October 19th. Parker was the first individual interviewed. Parker opened out to the police about his relationship with Avery, and they listened carefully. Parker responded that he had never felt close to his stepsister, and that it wasn't because of anything Avery had done when asked if he and his stepsister had a close relationship. Instead, it was because, following the death of his mother, he had found it difficult to accept his father's decision to get married again. He had offered the concept of another woman replacing his mother because he felt a sense of loyalty to her memory. John, who was at home alone with Parker, while Emily was gone on business, was questioned by the police. According to John, Avery kept to herself and didn't share anything with anyone, not even her mother. In contrast to Parker's earlier claim, he eventually disclosed that Avery was close to his son. John said they had a close bond and were quite fond of one another, much like siblings. He saw that Parker appeared to be the family member who knew the most about Avery's life. John gave an alibi when questioned about his whereabouts on the day Avery left home, claiming to have been at work starting at 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. He made reference to a midday meeting with co-workers, which would support his alibi. After conducting an investigation, the police discovered discrepancies between John's and Parker's claims, particularly how they described Avery and Parker's relationship. John's alibi was verified by his co-workers, but the inconsistencies in the family member's testimony prompted more inquiries from the police. After conducting an autopsy on Avery's dismembered body on October 21st, 2015, the forensic team gave the police a summary of their findings. Before she was dismembered, they learned that she had been smothered to death. The murder weapon was thought to have been a large knife, most likely a butcher knife, based on the cuts found on the body. They looked through the deceased's files. They called the Smiths to give their statements at the station, as they couldn't find any crucial clue that would help them find the murderer. They received a summons on the 22nd. Before she left, John was asked when he had last seen or spoken to Avery. After giving it some thought, John said that he recalled arriving home early on the 16th at around 2 or 3 p.m. to get something he had forgotten. From Parker's chamber, he had believed he heard Avery's voice. He added that no one answered when he knocked on the door. The door was locked, and he didn't give it much thought, because he thought everyone was out when he knocked and got no answer. As he spoke, the cops recorded his statement. John then showed them the text message he received from her announcing her visit to Adrian. When they inquired about his identity, John revealed that he was Avery's lover. She had never texted him about such things, or her previous adventures with him, he continued, so he thought it was odd. Following a questioning of Parker, the police received a new lead and quickly learned his residence. Adrian Gareth was taken into custody and interrogated. When they questioned him about why he killed Avery, he denied it since he didn't want to kill someone he had once loved. He went on to say that he hadn't seen her in 2 months since they had broken up. A week before, to the murder, they examined his activities, and they also examined the alibi he gave regarding his activities on the 16th, the day the victim left home. He was released once they verified it. The police had now returned to the start. No lead was found. They followed the deceased's phone number, which her stepfather had given them, but they were unsuccessful since they discovered it in a trash pile close to the body. After reviewing the case file once more and verifying the statements they had received, they turned their attention to John's son, Parker. Although he claimed to be distant from the victim, he appeared to know more about her than her stepfather, and even her boyfriend's personal information. On October 23rd, 2 police officers paid a visit to the Smith-Jones home the following day. On one occasion, Parker was called into the living room and asked where he had been the day the dead went home. Parker said that day he was at a friend's house. They asked Parker what he was doing between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. that day. He paused before responding, and they saw it. He replied that he had been sleeping at home. He was suspected of lying by the police. They looked through the book, which had his father's written declaration that no one had answered when he knocked on Parker's door. They started to go further. Parker responded to their inquiries. By getting in touch with the people Parker had given as references, the police made the decision to look into his alibi in detail. But when they contacted these connections, they discovered something unexpected. They were all unable to verify that Parker was present on that particular day. Contrary to what he had previously said, they all denied ever seeing Parker on that particular day. Suspicions were aroused by this fresh information. Thus, the police chose to further investigate. In an attempt to obtain additional evidence, they asked to view the CCTV footage from cameras near the Smiths' home. They got the video, watched it closely, and discovered something important. Around 7 p.m., Parker drove his father's car out of the compound, according to the CCTV footage. On October 16th, a significant detail that ran counter to what he had previously said. The police started looking into Parker more when this fresh evidence raised the possibility that he was connected to Avery's disappearance. Serious doubts were raised regarding his involvement because he had been spotted leaving the compound around the time Avery vanished and had used his father's automobile. The police were committed to solving the case and learning the real reason for Avery's disappearance. They immediately asked for a warrant to search Smith-Jones's house, and on October 24th, they did just that. They were shocked by what they discovered when they checked Parker's room. The hue of the duffel bag in which Avery was discovered was the same as several others. They looked in the drawer of his dresser. They discovered a butchering knife and a pair of gloves. The knife was stained with blood. He had undoubtedly used the same one to dismember the dead. Parker, who had been observing the entire time, was arrested on October 24th after sufficient evidence was discovered. Despite his denials, the cops pulled him into their van and sent him to the district for further investigation. The pillow he used to suffocate the girl contained her DNA, and the forensics team discovered bloodstains in his chamber. Other items discovered in the room indicated that the 2 step-siblings were intimate and close. Parker was unable to reject the evidence when the police presented it to him, so he broke down in tears and admitted to his crime. He hadn't killed Avery on purpose, despite what the police would believe. To be honest, he had come to love her. Their relationship had begun innocently enough, with a brief moment of solace that had developed into more. He claimed that following a heated disagreement with her partner on the phone, Avery was sobbing and trembling when they initially undressed. He had gone to console her, as he had been the only person present. Somehow, their mutual attraction had taken control, and they had found themselves sharing a bed. He went on to say that he had been lured to Avery's vulnerability since she had been exposed. Before he knew it, they were sharing a kiss after he had hugged her close and felt her warm tears on his skin. Even though it was a soft, loving moment, it had ignited something deeper inside of them. He went on to say that he had experienced a mixture of exhilaration and shame as they had undressed one another. After all, their parents would never approve of them because they were step-siblings. However, they were powerless to stop themselves. Their bodies were aching for each other's touch, and they had been attracted to one another like magnets. It had been passionate but uneasy the first time. They had experimented with one another's bodies, finding new cravings and pleasures. Parker had felt alive, as though he had at last discovered a person who could relate to him. They had been inseparable since that time. During family get-togethers, their hands would touch beneath the table as they stole glances at one another. They would sneak around, looking for opportunities to make love, kiss, and spend time alone. It was the first time Parker had ever felt that way about someone. The only reason he had lied to the police was to keep their secret safe. He had no intention of killing Avery, and he had no intention of hurting her either. He talked about what had happened that fateful day. He had been reluctant at first, but Avery had persuaded him to resume their romance when she had come to his room. He had been both excited and afraid as they started to undress, knowing that they might be caught at any time. His heart was pounding when the knock on the door finally arrived. He had been terrified that his stepmother or father had found them. In an instant, he had made a choice that would follow him for the rest of his life. In an attempt to drown out Avery's voice, which was starting to rise in panic, he had covered her face with the pillow. Instead of calming her down as he had hoped, it had the opposite effect. Parker had been too preoccupied with his own panic to see that Avery had fought beneath him, her body tensing up in fright. He hadn't noticed that Avery had stopped moving since he had been immobilized, his mind spinning with ideas of getting caught. He didn't notice her dead eyes staring back at him until he had lifted the pillow, assuming everything was fine. He hadn't been able to process what had happened and had been in shock. It was too late when he attempted to resuscitate her. Avery had left. Then, in the room, he had attempted to stuff her into one of his duffel bags, but her body was too big. He performed the unimaginable while trembling. He divided her body pieces with the butchering knife in the kitchen, then carefully packed them into his suitcase. After that, he took off in his father's other vehicle and abandoned the bag on a lonely section of Highway 12. The police discovered that Parker's affair had devolved from a moment of pleasure to ruin following the confession. While they kept Mrs. Emily, whom they had contacted to tell her on her vacation the day before about the killing of her daughter, the police let Mr. John see his son behind bars. They prevented her from taunting her spouse with her heels and holding him. Before departing on her journey, she had seen her daughter healthy, but upon seeing her horrifying body, she had collapsed. John had warned the police that he would bring his attorneys to rescue his son during the disturbance, arguing that his son was innocent and that he had been forced to confess to the murder. As word of the Smith-Jones incident spread like wildfire, numerous articles denouncing the boy's behavior were written. Some publications said that the youngster had done it accidentally and that he would only receive a little punishment. But because it was such a delicate subject, the articles were flooded and eventually removed. Many watched the story to find out what would happen to Parker. Parker appeared in court on November 1st for his offenses. He received a life sentence after being proven guilty. John, Parker's father, became enraged and yelled at the court. The penalty didn't seem fair to him. John was removed from the courtroom by the security personnel. Avery's mother, Emily, wept a lot and was quite depressed. She continued to mourn her daughter. Everyone was angry and passionate, and the courtroom was in disarray. Many people had suffered greatly as a result of Parker's activities. Even though he didn't kill his stepsister on purpose, should he still be punished severely for his crime? While some felt that a lighter sentence would be more appropriate, others maintained that his careless acts still called for a harsh punishment. Despite his son's terrible behavior toward Emily's child, was John still able to live with her?